David Reed pulled his travel pack tighter against his shoulder as he joined the long line of travelers waiting for security clearance. Port Meridian Station buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of worlds moved through the checkpoint. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter the mix of atmospheric preferences, creating a sterile smell that reminded him of hospitals. He kept his head down, watching the polished metal floor reflect the overhead lights. 3 aliens ahead of him in line spoke in rapid clicks and whistles about cargo prices. Behind him, a family of blue-skinned Altarians argued quietly about travel connections. David understood most languages after years of moving from station to station, but he rarely joined conversations anymore. The security scanner ahead looked like a giant metal ring standing upright. Each traveler stepped through while sensors read everything from bone density to recent meals. Most people passed through without incident. The lucky ones only got a quick pat-down for restricted items. David was not one of the lucky ones. When his turn came, he stepped into the scanner ring and raised his arms as instructed. The machine hummed for the usual 5 seconds, then kept humming. Red lights began flashing along the rim. The Centauri security officer named Kel looked up from his screen with 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "Please remain still," Kel said in accented standard. His voice carried the musical quality typical of his species. "The scanner has detected unusual markings on your person." David said nothing. He had been through this routine before on other stations. Sometimes the scars triggered alerts, sometimes they didn't. It depended on how detailed the security databases were and what classification levels the local authorities could access. "Remove your shirt, please," Kel requested politely. David pulled his plain gray shirt over his head without protest. The beings waiting behind him in line shifted uncomfortably as they saw his chest and back. Geometric patterns covered his torso in raised scar tissue. The marks formed precise lines and curves that intersected at specific points. They looked almost like circuit patterns or star charts carved into human flesh. Kel's 4 eyes widened as he stared at the scarring. He had never seen anything like it in 20 years of security work. The patterns were too precise to be random injuries, too complex to be simple tribal markings, and too extensive to be decorative scarification. "May I ask how you acquired these markings?" Kel asked while his fingers moved across his control panel. "An accident," David replied quietly. "Long time ago." The Centauri officer activated his deep scan protocols and watched data stream across multiple screens. Biometric readings, cross-references with criminal databases, medical anomaly flags, and threat assessments all ran simultaneously. Most scans took seconds to complete. This one kept running for nearly a minute. Then the results appeared. Kel's breathing stopped completely for several heartbeats. The words on his screen made no sense. He read them again, then checked to make sure his translation software was working correctly. When he confirmed the meaning, his hands began to shake. Match confirmed. Scarification pattern Alpha 7 subject classification. Planet killer survivor threat level. Omega immediate escalation required, do not detain alone contact. Hegemony command immediately planet killer survivor. Kel had heard whispers about such classifications but never expected to encounter one. The Hegemony database listed only 7 beings in the entire galaxy with this designation. All 7 were human. All 7 had been present during complete planetary destructions, and somehow survived when billions of others died. The security officer's training kicked in despite his fear. He pressed the silent alarm button under his desk while maintaining a calm expression. Within seconds, additional security personnel would be responding to his location. "Sir, I need you to step aside for additional screening," Kel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is routine procedure for certain classifications." David pulled his shirt back on and nodded. "I understand." But something in David's eyes suggested he understood far more than a typical traveler should. There was no surprise, no confusion, no indignation at the delay. Just quiet acceptance, as if he had been expecting this moment. 2 more Centauri officers arrived within minutes, followed by a tall humanoid with gray skin and silver eyes. The newcomer wore the dark uniform of Hegemony Intelligence. His name tag read Commander Ilth in multiple languages. "Mr. Reed," Commander Ilth said, somehow knowing David's name without being told. "Would you please accompany us to a more private area? We have some questions about your travel history." David picked up his pack and followed the officers away from the main security checkpoint. Other travelers watched them go with mixtures of curiosity and relief. Whatever was happening, they were glad it wasn't happening to them. The private screening room was small and sterile. David sat in the single chair while the 3 security officers and Commander Ilth positioned themselves around the room. No one appeared threatening, but David noticed they kept their hands near their weapons. The database indicates you were present during the Kepler incident, Commander Ilth began without preamble. You are listed as the sole survivor of a planetary extinction event. Is this information correct? The database says what it says, David replied. 15 billion beings died when Kepler-7 was destroyed, Ilth continued. Every city, every settlement, every living thing on the entire planet was eliminated in a matter of hours. Yet somehow you survived. How is this possible? David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the room feel smaller. I did what needed to be done. I paid the price that needed to be paid. And I lived when others didn't. That explains nothing, Commander Ilth said with frustration creeping into his tone. It explains everything, David countered. You just don't understand what the price was. The hegemony officer leaned forward in his chair. Help me understand. What happened on Kepler-7? What destroyed an entire world? And why are you still alive when everyone else is dead? David looked at each of the 4 aliens in turn. Their faces showed fear, confusion, and suspicion in equal measure. He had seen those expressions before on other stations, in other security rooms, during other interrogations. Some prices can only be paid once, he said finally. Some choices can't be undone, and some knowledge changes you forever. Are you a threat to galactic security? Commander Ilth asked directly. David almost smiled at the question. Commander, if I were a threat to galactic security, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air recycling system. Outside the small chamber, Port Meridian Station continued its normal operations. Ships arrived and departed. Cargo changed hands, travelers moved between worlds. Life went on as it always had. But word was already spreading through the station's communication networks. A planet-killer survivor had been identified. One of only 7 humans in the galaxy with that terrible classification was sitting in Security Room 7, answering questions about events that had destroyed an entire world. David Reed closed his eyes and waited for what would come next. He had been running from his past for 15 years, moving from station to station, trying to blend in among the countless beings who traveled the galaxy. But the scars across his chest made hiding impossible. The marks were permanent reminders of choices made in darkness, of trials survived through stubborn human will, and of knowledge that no one else in the galaxy possessed. The interrogation was just beginning. Commander Ilth dismissed the local security officers after they transferred David to a high-security holding facility deep within Port Meridian Station. The room had no windows, just smooth metal walls that could withstand weapons fire from most known species. A single table sat between 2 chairs under bright white lighting that cast no shadows. David sat quietly with his hands folded in his lap. He showed no signs of stress or discomfort despite being detained for over 6 hours. Most beings would have demanded legal representation by now, or at least asked about meal schedules. David simply waited with the patience of someone who had been through this process before. Ilth entered carrying a data tablet thick with files. His silver eyes studied the human across from him as he took the opposite chair. In 30 years of intelligence work, he had interrogated smugglers, pirates, war criminals, and terrorist leaders. None of them had unsettled him quite like this quiet man with scars across his chest. Your full name is David Michael Reed, Ilth began, reading from his tablet. Born on Earth Colony 7, age 42 standard years. You worked as a systems engineer on Kepler-7 until the planet was destroyed 15 years ago. Since then, you have moved between stations and colonies, taking temporary jobs and never staying in one place for more than a few months. David nodded, but said nothing. What I find interesting, Ilth continued, is that you have perfect travel documentation for the past 15 years. Clean background checks, no criminal record, no debts or legal problems. You pay your taxes on time and never cause trouble. You are the most unremarkable person in the galaxy. Except for the scars, David said quietly. Except for the scars, Ilth agreed. And the fact that you survived something that killed 15 billion other beings. The hegemony officer activated his tablet's display mode and projected holographic images above the table. The first image showed Kepler-7 as it had been, a blue and green world with 3 small moons, covered in agricultural settlements and connected by transport networks. The second image showed empty space where the planet used to be. Not even debris remained. Complete planetary annihilation, Ilth said. No asteroid impact, no stellar collapse, no superweapon signatures. The planet and everything on it simply stopped existing. One day, Kepler-7 was sending routine communications to the hegemony. The next day, our long-range sensors detected nothing but empty space. David stared at the holographic images without expression. The only reason we know anyone was on the planet when it was destroyed is because of emergency beacon data, recovered from a cargo ship that jumped to hyperspace just as the event began. The ship's sensors recorded massive energy readings from the planet's surface moments before everything vanished. Yelth swiped to the next image, a grainy sensor recording that showed geometric patterns of light spreading across Kepler-7's surface like a circuit board activating. The patterns match the scars on your chest, Ilth said. Exactly. David finally looked up from the table. You've been doing your research. I accessed the classified files, Ilth admitted. The hegemony has been investigating planet killer events for decades. 7 worlds destroyed, 7 human survivors. Each time, the same energy patterns. Each time one person walks away when everyone else dies. The commander leaned back in his chair and studied David's face for any reaction. What makes this more interesting is that we finally located 2 other survivors for questioning. Both had the same scarring patterns you do. Both gave the same vague answers about paying prices and doing what needed to be done, and both died within days of being interrogated. David's expression changed for the first time since the questioning began. A flicker of sadness crossed his features. They weren't murdered, Ilth continued. Medical scans showed they simply stopped living. Their bodies shut down as if some kind of kill switch had been activated. The doctors found no cause of death, no toxins, no diseases. They just died. Some knowledge has a cost, David said quietly. What knowledge? Ilth demanded. What happened on those planets? What force can destroy entire worlds without leaving any trace? And why do humans keep surviving these events? David was quiet for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had carried a terrible burden for years. Have you ever wondered why humans are the only species that explores dangerous places just because they're dangerous? Why we climb the highest mountains, dive into the deepest oceans, and fly into space long before we have any practical reason to do so? Curiosity is common to most intelligent species, Yelth replied. No, David shook his head. Most species explore for resources, territory, or knowledge that benefits them. Humans explore because we refuse to accept that something is impossible. We poke things that might kill us just to see what happens. Yelth frowned. What does this have to do with destroyed planets? Sometimes when you poke something dangerous, it pokes back, David said. And sometimes you discover that the thing you thought was dangerous was actually testing whether you were brave enough to poke it. The hegemony officer felt a chill run through his gray skin. You're saying the planets weren't destroyed by an attack? They were destroyed by some kind of test? David stared at the holographic image of empty space where Kepler-7 used to be. The galaxy is very old, Commander. Millions of species have risen and fallen over billions of years. Some of them left things behind. Safeguards, trials, ways to determine if newer species were worthy of certain knowledge. The scarring on your chest, Ilth said slowly. It's not from weapons. It's from some kind of interface. The trials were not designed for human physiology, David explained. They were created by beings who thought differently, felt differently, and had completely different ideas about what constituted survival. No known species had ever passed one of these trials. Most died within minutes of beginning the process. Ilth leaned forward. But humans passed. Some of us, David confirmed. We lasted long enough to complete the trials, even though they nearly killed us. The scars are permanent marks left by neural interfaces that were never meant to connect to human minds. What happens to someone who passes these trials? David looked directly into Ilth's silver eyes. They learn things that the galaxy isn't ready to know. They gain access to knowledge that could change the balance of power between all known species, and they become responsible for protecting that knowledge from those who would misuse it. The other survivors who died during questioning, Ilth said, they weren't killed by some external force. They chose to die rather than reveal what they knew. Some prices can only be paid once, David repeated his earlier words. Some choices can't be undone, and some knowledge changes you forever. Commander Ilth stood and paced around the small room. The implications of what David was suggesting were staggering. An ancient network of trials scattered across the galaxy. Tests designed to evaluate newer species, and humans were apparently the first species capable of surviving these evaluations. "How many trials are there?" he asked. "I don't know," David answered honestly. "The one on Kepler-7 was connected to others, but the network is vast and much of it is dormant. Some trials may activate when a species reaches certain technological levels. Others might respond to different triggers. And the planets that get destroyed? The trials are designed to leave no evidence behind. If a species fails the test, everything gets erased to prevent other civilizations from learning about the trial's existence. If they pass," David gestured to his scarred chest, "the survivors carry the knowledge forward." Ilth stopped pacing and turned to face David. "What knowledge did you gain from the trial on Kepler-7? David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I learned that humanity is not ready for what's waiting for us out there, and I learned that some of us will have to carry that burden until the rest of our species is prepared for the truth." The interrogation room fell silent, except for the hum of the air recycling system. Commander Ilth realized he was faced with a choice. He could continue pressing for details that might get him killed like the other investigators. Or he could accept that some secrets were too dangerous to uncover. Outside the holding facility, word was spreading through the station's alien population. A planet killer survivor was being held in security. Someone who had witnessed the destruction of an entire world and somehow lived to tell about it. Fear and curiosity spread through the corridors in equal measure. But David Reed sat quietly in his chair, waiting for whatever would come next. He had carried his burden alone for 15 years. Now others were beginning to learn pieces of the truth, and he wondered if the galaxy was ready for the consequences of that knowledge. 15 years earlier, David Reed had been a different person entirely. He laughed more often, slept better at night, and believed the universe was a place where good engineering could solve most problems. The colonial settlement on Kepler-7 was supposed to be his retirement project, a chance to help build something lasting on a peaceful, agricultural world far from the complexities of galactic politics. The settlement of Haven Ridge sat in a valley surrounded by golden wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. 2,000 colonists had made their homes there, most of them families looking for a simpler life away from the crowded stations and industrial worlds. David ran the power grid and communication systems, work that kept him busy but satisfied. Children played in the streets between prefabricated houses while their parents tended gardens and operated farming equipment. The local school taught basic standard alongside Earth languages, preparing the next generation for whatever future they might choose. It was everything the colony brochures had promised: peaceful, productive, and far from the troubles that plagued older worlds. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning when David's diagnostic systems detected power fluctuations deep underground. The readings made no sense. Energy patterns were building beneath the settlement, but there were no power sources down there. The colonists had built everything on the surface. David spent 3 days running tests and checking equipment. The underground energy readings kept growing stronger. By Friday, they were powerful enough to interfere with communication satellites orbiting the planet. By the following Monday, the fluctuations were causing blackouts across the settlement. "It's like there's a massive reactor buried under us," David told the colony administrator, a stern woman named Patricia Wells. "But our geological surveys showed nothing but bedrock and mineral deposits." Patricia frowned as she studied the readings on David's tablet. Could the surveys have missed something? Some kind of natural energy source? "These patterns aren't natural," David said. "They're too regular, too organized. Someone or something built whatever is down there." The decision to investigate came after the underground energy began affecting the weather. Strange aurora-like lights appeared in the daytime sky, despite Kepler-7 having no magnetic field strong enough to create such phenomena. Livestock became nervous and refused to graze in certain areas. Several colonists reported vivid dreams about geometric patterns and voices speaking in unknown languages. David led a team of 12 volunteers down into the cave system they discovered beneath Haven Ridge. The caves had not existed during the initial geological surveys, which suggested they had been created recently or revealed by the energy activity. Emergency lighting illuminated rough stone walls that gradually gave way to smooth metal corridors, clearly built by intelligent beings. The deeper they went, the stronger the energy readings became. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power that made their teeth ache and their hair stand on end. After 2 hours of descending through increasingly artificial passages, they found the source. The chamber was enormous, easily large enough to hold the entire settlement above. Curved walls rose into darkness beyond the reach of their lights. In the center of the space sat something that defied easy description, a crystalline structure the size of a building, pulsing with internal light and surrounded by rings of floating metal that rotated slowly around it. "My God," whispered Sarah Kim, the settlement's lead scientist. "It's some kind of machine. But the design, I've never seen anything like it." The structure was clearly artificial but followed no engineering principles used by any known species. Where human technology relied on straight lines and right angles, this device curved and flowed like organic growth. Where alien technology typically showed mathematical precision, this machine seemed to pulse with something resembling life. David approached the nearest wall panel and found it covered in the same geometric patterns that had been appearing in people's dreams. When he touched the surface, it responded with warm light spreading outward from his fingertips. That was when the voice began speaking inside his head. It did not use words in any language he recognized. Instead, concepts and images flowed directly into his mind. Eons of time, the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and the purpose of the machine he was touching. The device was a trial system, designed to evaluate species that reached certain levels of technological development. Most species were deemed unworthy and eliminated to prevent them from accessing knowledge they could not handle responsibly. A few were judged as having potential and allowed to continue developing on their own. And rarely, very rarely, a species produced individuals capable of surviving direct interface with the trial system and gaining access to restricted knowledge. The machine had been dormant for over 50,000 years, waiting for a species to develop sufficiently to trigger its activation. The human settlement on Kepler-7 had finally reached that threshold. David tried to pull his hand away from the wall panel but found himself unable to move. The connection had been established and could not be broken until the trial was complete. Images continued flowing into his mind. The locations of other trial systems throughout the galaxy, the knowledge they protected, and the terrible price of accessing that information. The trial would test his species through him. If he failed, everyone on Kepler-7 would die and all evidence of the trial would be erased. If he succeeded, he would gain knowledge that could advance humanity by thousands of years, but would be forbidden from sharing it until his species demonstrated they could handle such power responsibly. David felt the other colonists gather around him as his body began to change. The neural interface was carving channels through his nervous system, creating permanent pathways between his mind and the ancient machine. The process was agony beyond description, but stopping meant the death of everyone he had come to care about. The scars began forming across his chest and back as the machine established deeper connections. Each mark represented a different test: physical endurance, mental flexibility, moral reasoning, and spiritual strength. The trials were designed for species with completely different physiologies and thought patterns. No known race had ever survived more than the first few minutes of testing. But humans, David learned, possessed something that other species lacked. Where aliens typically had specialized strengths, humans were generalists who refused to accept defeat even when victory seemed impossible. Where other races had evolutionary advantages in specific areas, humans compensated through pure stubborn determination to survive. Hours passed in the underground chamber, while David endured trials that pushed his mind and body beyond their limits. The other colonists could only watch as geometric patterns of light spread across his skin, and the machine tested whether humanity was ready for the responsibilities that came with advanced knowledge. Sarah Kim monitored his vital signs as best she could with portable equipment. His heart rate and brain activity spiked beyond what should have been survivable. Yet somehow he remained conscious and connected to the alien system. She had studied human physiology for 20 years but had never seen anything like what was happening to David. The final test came near dawn. The machine presented David with a choice. He could gain knowledge that would allow him to save Kepler-7 and its colonists, but doing so would mark him forever as someone who had passed the trials. Other powers in the galaxy would eventually learn of his survival and hunt him for the knowledge he carried. Or he could refuse the knowledge, allowing the trial system to complete its programming and erase all evidence of its existence, including everyone on the planet. David chose to save his friends and neighbors, knowing it would cost him everything else. The machine downloaded vast amounts of information directly into his brain, star maps showing the locations of other trial systems, technical specifications for technologies beyond current galactic understanding, and warnings about the consequences of sharing such knowledge prematurely. The data burned itself into his memory where it could never be forgotten or completely erased. When the transfer was complete, the machine began its shutdown sequence. The chamber filled with blinding light as energy systems that had operated for millions of years finally powered down permanently. The underground facility would soon collapse, taking all evidence of the trial with it. David felt himself being transported away from Kepler-7, just as the planet began to dissolve. The machine had completed its programming. The trial was over, the knowledge was preserved, and no evidence remained for other species to discover. He materialized on an empty cargo ship in deep space, watching through a viewport as Kepler-7 simply faded from existence. 2,000 people who had trusted him to keep their power systems running were gone in an instant. He had saved them by passing the trial and condemned them by the same choice. The scars across his chest burned with residual energy from the neural interface. They would never heal completely, serving as permanent reminders of the price he had paid for knowledge that humanity was not yet ready to possess. David Reed, systems engineer and reluctant trial survivor, began his long journey of hiding among the stars, carrying secrets that could reshape the galaxy and hoping his species would mature quickly enough to handle the truth before other powers discovered what humans were capable of: surviving. The neural interface felt like ice and fire, running through David's veins simultaneously. Each pulse of energy from the ancient machine carved new pathways through his nervous system, while his hand remained fused to the wall panel. Around him, the other colonists watched in horrified fascination as geometric patterns of light spread across his skin like living tattoos. Sarah. Kim held her medical scanner with shaking hands as impossible. Readings flashed across its screen. David's brain showed activity levels that should have caused immediate seizures or death. His heart rate fluctuated wildly between extremes that would normally indicate system failure. Yet somehow he remained conscious and responsive to the machine's probing. "David, can you hear us?" Patricia Wells called out, though she made no attempt to approach the glowing interface. David's response came not from his mouth but directly into their minds, carried by the same energy field that surrounded the ancient device. His mental voice carried pain and determination in equal measure. "The machine is testing me, testing humanity through me. I can feel it examining every aspect of human psychology and physiology." The first trial began without warning. David's body temperature spiked to levels that should have cooked his internal organs. The machine was evaluating human heat tolerance, comparing it to data from thousands of other species that had undergone the same test. Most had died within seconds. David endured for minutes, his stubborn refusal to surrender keeping him alive long enough for his body to adapt. The second trial dropped his core temperature below freezing while maintaining his consciousness. Again, the machine measured human cold resistance against its vast database of failed attempts. David's breathing created frost clouds in the underground chamber, as his body fought to maintain essential functions. Other species had typically lost consciousness immediately and died shortly after. David remained aware and fighting throughout the ordeal. The physical trials continued for hours. Pressure tests that should have crushed his bones, gravitational fields that pulled his body in different directions simultaneously, electrical charges that should have stopped his heart. Each test pushed human limitations beyond what medical science considered survivable. But the machine discovered something unexpected in its evaluation. Humans possessed an almost supernatural ability to adapt under extreme stress. Where other species had rigid physiological responses, human bodies could shift and compensate in real time. Where alien minds typically shut down to protect themselves from trauma, human consciousness remained stubbornly active even under the most severe conditions. "He's not just surviving," Sarah whispered as she watched the readings. "His body is learning from each test and becoming more resistant to the next one." The mental trials proved even more challenging than the physical ones. The machine projected scenarios directly into David's mind, forcing him to experience situations designed to break the psychological defenses of various species. He lived through the destruction of entire civilizations, felt the despair of extinction-level events, and witnessed the collapse of everything he held dear. Other species typically succumbed to madness or withdrew into catatonic states when faced with such overwhelming horror. The machine's database showed no examples of any race maintaining rational thought while experiencing simulated genocide and cosmic-scale disasters. David not only remained sane, he began analyzing the scenarios for solutions. Even while experiencing artificial memories of planetary destruction, part of his mind worked on evacuation plans, resource management, and survival strategies. The human tendency to problem-solve under pressure impressed the ancient system in ways its creators had never anticipated. The moral trials came next. David was presented with impossible choices where every option resulted in some form of suffering or loss. Save 1 million people by sacrificing 1,000. Preserve one world by allowing 3 others to be destroyed. Choose between advancing your species or protecting galactic stability. The machine expected responses based on logical calculations or predetermined ethical frameworks. Instead, David approached each scenario by looking for alternatives that the system had not considered. He refused to accept that terrible choices were the only options available and consistently found ways to minimize harm while achieving necessary goals. The machine is confused, David reported through their mental link. It was designed to evaluate species that think in predictable patterns. Humans keep finding solutions that don't fit its programming. As the trials progressed, the geometric patterns on David's skin became more complex and deeper. The scars were not just marks left by the neural interface, but actual circuit pathways being carved into his nervous system. The machine was literally rewiring his brain to accommodate knowledge that human minds were not originally designed to contain. The process should have resulted in immediate death or permanent insanity. Human neural plasticity proved far more adaptable than the machine's designers had accounted for. David's consciousness expanded to accommodate new forms of thought and perception, while somehow maintaining his essential humanity. The knowledge began flowing during the final phase of testing. Star maps showing the locations of other trial systems throughout the galaxy, technical specifications for technologies that could revolutionize space travel, energy production, and communication, biological data that could cure diseases and extend lifespans, weapons designs that could shatter moons or protect entire star systems. But along with the knowledge came understanding of why it was restricted. The machine showed David what happened when advanced technologies fell into the hands of species that were not prepared for such power, wars that consumed entire galactic sectors, civilizations that destroyed themselves within generations of accessing restricted knowledge, the ruins of races that had gained too much power too quickly. The trial system had been created by beings who had learned these lessons through bitter experience. They had established the network to ensure that only species capable of handling ultimate responsibility could access ultimate power. The tests were not designed to be fair or survivable. They were designed to identify races that possessed the rare combination of intelligence, wisdom, and moral strength necessary to use cosmic-level technologies responsibly. David understood why no other species had passed the trials. Most intelligent races evolved along specialized paths that gave them particular advantages, but also created predictable limitations. They were logical but inflexible, powerful but narrow in focus, or wise but lacking the drive to push beyond established boundaries. Humans were different. They had evolved as generalists on a world that required constant adaptation to survive. They possessed intelligence without losing creativity, developed technology while maintaining spirituality, and showed wisdom that coexisted with an almost reckless willingness to explore the unknown. The machine completed its evaluation as the first rays of sunlight penetrated the cave system above. David had survived trials designed to eliminate entire civilizations. He had demonstrated that humanity possessed the unique combination of traits necessary to handle advanced galactic technologies. The knowledge transfer was complete and the test protocols were satisfied. But success came with a terrible price. The machine's programming required the destruction of all evidence once a trial was complete. No other species could be allowed to learn about the network or attempt to reverse engineer the testing process. Even successful subjects were forbidden from sharing their knowledge until their entire species demonstrated readiness for advancement. David felt the transport beam activating as the machine began its final shutdown sequence. He would be moved to safety while Kepler-7 was erased from existence. 2,000 colonists who had become his friends and neighbors would die, not because they failed the trial, but because they had succeeded. Their sacrifice was the price of humanity's potential future. The last thing David saw through the neural interface was the machine's final assessment of his species. Humans were classified as having the highest potential for responsible use of advanced technologies of any race evaluated in over 50,000 years, but they were also deemed too young and inexperienced to handle such power immediately. Knowledge would remain locked in the minds of trial survivors until humanity demonstrated sufficient maturity to use it wisely. How long that might take was unknown. Other species had required thousands of years of development between their first successful trial and the point where they were allowed to share restricted knowledge. David Reed materialized alone on an empty cargo ship, carrying secrets that could reshape the galaxy, and knowing he might spend the rest of his life protecting those secrets from his own species. The scars across his chest burned with residual energy from the neural interface, permanent reminders of the price paid for humanity's potential, and the burden of being the first of his kind to survive what was never meant to be survivable. Behind him, Kepler-7 faded into nothingness, taking with it any evidence that the trial had ever occurred, and leaving only one human to carry the weight of what his species might become. Commander Hilth spent the next 18 hours accessing classified databases that required authorization from 3 different hegemony departments. What he discovered changed his understanding of galactic history and left him questioning everything he thought he knew about humanity's place in the universe. The files were buried deep within military intelligence archives, marked with clearance levels that few beings in the galaxy were authorized to access. Planet-killer events had been occurring for over 2,000 years, but the pattern had only become apparent in the last century, as communication networks improved and data sharing between species became more common. 7 worlds destroyed completely. 7 human survivors, and each event followed the same impossible pattern. The first recorded incident had occurred on Rigel 4, a mining colony established by Earth's early expansion programs. 3,000 humans had been working the asteroid mines when the entire system simply vanished from sensor readings. A single escape pod was found drifting in deep space weeks later, containing a man named Peter Walsh, whose body bore the same geometric scarring that marked David Reed. Walsh had been interrogated by hegemony authorities, but died within days of questioning. Just as David had warned, medical records showed no cause of death. His body simply stopped functioning as if some internal mechanism had switched off his life support systems. The second event destroyed New Geneva, a diplomatic outpost where humans were learning to work with alien species. 8,000 people vanished along with the entire station. The sole survivor, Maria Santos, was found floating in a maintenance pod with fresh scars across her arms and back. She lived for 6 days after rescue, long enough to mutter strange phrases about trials and prices that needed to be paid. Each subsequent event followed the same pattern. A human settlement or colony would develop to a certain point of technological or social advancement. Then something would trigger an extinction-level event that left no trace of what had caused the destruction. One person would survive with unexplained scarring and knowledge they refused or were unable to share. Commander Jolth cross-referenced the locations of destroyed worlds with stellar cartography databases and found another disturbing pattern. Each planet had been built on or near sites that showed traces of extremely ancient construction. Geological surveys revealed evidence of artificial structures buried deep beneath the surface, often predating known galactic civilization by millions of years. The implication was staggering. Some ancient network of automated systems had been scattered throughout the galaxy, lying dormant until activated by species that reached certain development thresholds. Humans kept triggering these systems and somehow surviving encounters that were apparently designed to be fatal. David Reed sat quietly in his holding cell while Ilth worked through the classified files. He had been given basic meal rations and allowed to rest, but surveillance showed he spent most of his time staring at the ceiling, with the expression of someone carrying tremendous weight on his shoulders. When Ilth finally returned to the interrogation room, he carried data tablets containing information that painted a picture of humanity as either the luckiest species in galactic history or something far more significant. "I've been reading about your friends," Ilth said as he took his seat across from David. "Peter Walsh, Maria Santos, Thomas Chen, Rebecca Park, Michael Torres, and Jennifer Kim. 6 other humans who survived planetary destruction events, all dead within days of being questioned by authorities." David's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes at the mention of the other names. "You knew them," Ilth observed. "Not personally, but you knew of them." "We could sense each other," David admitted quietly. "The trial process creates connections between survivors. We knew when one of us died during interrogation. We felt their loss. Why did they die? And why are you still alive when I've been questioning you for over a day?" David was quiet for several minutes before answering. "They tried to protect the knowledge by choosing death over revelation. I'm still alive because I've decided the galaxy needs to know the truth even if it's not ready for it." Ilth leaned forward with intense interest. "What truth?" "Your ancient galactic civilization never developed like you think it did," David began. "The histories your species keep, the archaeological records, the timeline of technological development, most of it is wrong." The hegemony officer frowned. "Wrong how?" "The galaxy has been through cycles of advancement and destruction for millions of years. Civilizations rise, gain access to incredible technologies, misuse them, and destroy themselves or get eliminated by safeguards left by their predecessors. The trial network is a filtering system designed to identify species that might break the cycle." David gestured toward the walls of the interrogation room, as if indicating the vast space beyond. "Every major species in current galactic civilization descended from survivors of previous cycles. Your people, the Centauri, the Altarians, all the others. You're the remnants of races that barely survived their own advancement phases." Ilth felt a chill run through his silver skin. "You're suggesting our entire understanding of galactic history is incomplete." "It's deliberately incomplete," David corrected. "The trial network erases evidence of its own existence to prevent species from trying to cheat the system. But it keeps records of everything. When you pass a trial, you gain access to the real history of the galaxy. And that history shows what?" David's expression grew darker. "It shows that humans are the first species in over 50,000 years to demonstrate the kind of adaptability and resilience necessary to use advanced technologies without destroying themselves or others. We're not just lucky survivors. We're the species the ancient builders hoped would eventually emerge." The implications hit Ilth like a physical blow. If David was telling the truth, humanity wasn't simply another intelligent race making its way through the galaxy. They were potentially the inheritors of technologies and knowledge that predated current civilization by millions of years. "The other powers in the galaxy," Ilth said slowly. "Do any of them suspect this?" "Some do," David nodded. "That's why survivors like me have been hunted. Various factions want to capture us and extract the knowledge we carry, either to use it for themselves or to prevent humans from accessing it." Ilth accessed his data tablet and pulled up intelligence reports from the past decade. Patterns began emerging that he had not noticed before. Increased surveillance of human colonies by unknown vessels, disappearances of humans with technical expertise, and several incidents where human settlements had been attacked by forces using weapons that didn't match any known technology. Someone's been testing human defensive capabilities, Ilth realized. Seeing how we respond to threats. The knowledge I carry includes locations of other trial systems, David explained. If humanity continues to develop at our current rate, we'll trigger more trials within the next few decades. Some factions want to prevent that from happening. Others want to be present when it does so they can try to access the knowledge themselves. Commander Ilth stood and paced around the small room as he processed the information. Everything he thought he knew about galactic politics and human expansion was based on incomplete data. If David was correct, humanity was either on the verge of becoming the most powerful species in known space or facing extinction from those who feared that possibility. "Why are you telling me this?" Ilth asked. "You could have remained silent like the others." David met his gaze directly. "Because the galaxy is about to change whether we're ready for it or not. More humans will trigger trials in the coming years. The network is becoming active again after millennia of dormancy. The secret is going to come out. And you think it's better for the information to be shared voluntarily rather than discovered through conflict? I think, David said carefully, that species like yours deserve to know what's coming. The hegemony has tried to maintain stability and peace between different races. That's going to become much more difficult. When some of those races realize that humans have access to technologies that could reshape the balance of power, Yilth stopped pacing and turned to face David. What do you need from me? Help me contact the other survivors before they're killed or captured. There are only 3 of us left alive, and we need to coordinate our response to what's coming. The knowledge we carry is too important to lose because we're hiding from each other. The hegemony officer considered the request. Helping David could be seen as treason if his superiors decided that human advancement posed a threat to galactic stability. But allowing the situation to develop without oversight could lead to chaos that would make current political tensions seem trivial. If I help you, Yilth said finally, I want full disclosure about what technologies you have access to and what changes we can expect in the coming years. David nodded slowly. Commander, once I start sharing that information, there will be no going back for any of our species. The galaxy as we know it will cease to exist. Outside the interrogation room, Port Meridian Station continued its normal operations while news of the planet killer survivors spread through communication networks. Various alien factions were already dispatching agents to the station, some hoping to capture David for interrogation, others planning to eliminate him before he could share dangerous knowledge. The ancient trial network remained largely dormant throughout the galaxy, but sensors in hidden facilities were beginning to detect increased human activity in space. More colonies were being established, new technologies were being developed, and the thresholds that triggered testing protocols were being approached on multiple worlds. David Reed had made his choice to break the silence that had protected him for 15 years. Now the consequences of that decision would reshape the relationship between every intelligent species in known space. News of the planet killer survivors' presence on Port Meridian Station spread through the galactic communication networks faster than Commander Yilth had anticipated. Within 6 hours of his decision to help David Reed, 3 different factions had dispatched agents to the station while 2 others were actively jamming communications in an attempt to prevent information from spreading further. David sat in the station's conference room, no longer a prisoner but not exactly free either. The geometric scars across his chest were visible through his open shirt as he studied holographic displays showing ship movements in the surrounding space. His expression carried the weight of someone who had seen this pattern before. 14 vessels approaching from different vectors, David observed as he tracked the sensor readings. Some of them are trying to hide their signatures, others are broadcasting false identification codes. They're not here for trade negotiations. Commander Yilth monitored communications from the station's security center, while his staff worked to identify the incoming ships. I'm seeing Corvin Syndicate markings on 2 of them, possible hegemony intelligence on another, and at least 3 I don't recognize at all. The ones you don't recognize are probably from factions that have been studying the trial survivors for years, David said grimly. They've kept themselves hidden while gathering information about humans who passed the tests. The first ship to dock was a sleek vessel that bypassed normal docking procedures and attached directly to the station's high-security ports. Armed figures in environmental suits moved through the corridors, heading directly toward David's location with the confidence of beings who knew exactly where to find their target. Yilth activated the station's internal defense systems and sealed the conference room, but they both knew the barriers would only buy them time. David stood and began pacing around the room with nervous energy that suggested his calm exterior was covering significant tension. I need to contact the other survivors before this gets worse, David said. There are 3 of us left alive and we need to coordinate our response. Where are they? Yilth asked while monitoring security feeds showing armed figures cutting through blast doors with weapons that didn't appear in any hegemony database. Lisa Park is on a research station near the galactic core. Robert Nash is working construction on a mining platform in the Outer Rim. Both of them have been staying hidden like I was, but if these factions are moving openly, they'll be targeted next. Yilth opened communication channels on frequencies that would reach both locations, while his security teams engaged the intruders in corridor firefights. The station's defensive systems were holding for now, but the attackers showed tactical knowledge that suggested they had been planning this operation for some time. The first response came from Lisa Park, whose voice carried the same weary tone that marked all the trial survivors. "David, I thought you were maintaining communication silence." "The silence is over," David replied. "Multiple factions are moving to capture or eliminate us. We need to make our choice now. Stay hidden and die separately, or reveal what we know and change everything." Robert Nash's voice joined the communication from his mining platform. "I've got unknown ships approaching my position too. My scars have been burning for the past hour, which usually means other survivors are in danger." The neural connections between trial survivors allowed them to sense each other's distress across vast distances. It was one of the permanent changes left by the ancient testing process, along with the geometric scarification and access to restricted knowledge. "What's the tactical situation?" Lisa asked as explosions echoed through the communication channel from her end. Yulth provided a quick summary, while his staff reported that the attackers had reached the outer security perimeter. "We estimate at least 5 different factions are involved. Some want to capture survivors for interrogation. Others appear to be trying to eliminate them entirely. The knowledge we carry is too dangerous to lose," David said firmly. "If they kill all 3 of us, humanity loses its only direct access to the trial network data. Our species will be flying blind into whatever comes next." Through the station's external sensors, they could see more ships arriving in the system. Some moved to defensive positions around the station, while others began targeting each other in space battles that lit up the void with weapons fire. The competition for access to trial survivors had apparently triggered conflicts between factions that had been building tension for years. "David," Robert's voice carried resignation mixed with determination, "I think we all know what we have to do. The question is whether we're ready for the consequences." The ancient knowledge locked in their minds included not just technological specifications and star maps, but detailed information about what would happen when humanity gained access to advanced galactic technologies. The trials had shown them possible futures where their species became either the galaxy's greatest protectors or its most dangerous threat. "We've been carrying this burden alone for too long," Lisa said as sounds of combat grew louder from her location. "Maybe it's time to trust our own species with the truth." David nodded even though the others couldn't see him. "Commander Ilth, I need you to open a broadcast channel to every major communication network in the galaxy. What I'm about to share will change the relationship between every intelligent species in known space." Ilth hesitated for a moment, then activated the station's most powerful communication systems. The message would reach billions of beings across thousands of worlds within minutes. "This is David Reed speaking from Port Meridian Station," David began, his voice carrying clearly through the galactic networks. "I am one of 3 remaining humans who have survived what you call planet killer events. What I'm about to tell you will explain why those events occurred and what they mean for the future of all our species." The fighting in the corridors seemed to pause as the various factions realized that the information they were trying to capture was being broadcast openly. David continued without hesitation. The destroyed planets were not victims of attacks. They were test sites for an ancient network designed to evaluate species for advancement to higher levels of galactic civilization. The tests were created by beings who ruled the galaxy millions of years ago, and they remain active throughout known space. On thousands of worlds, beings stopped what they were doing to listen as David revealed the existence of the trial network. He explained how the tests worked, why they destroyed entire worlds, and what knowledge was gained by those who survived the evaluation process. "Humans appear to be uniquely suited to survive these trials," David said, his voice remaining steady despite the chaos around him. "We are the first species in over 50,000 years to consistently pass tests that were designed to eliminate civilizations that couldn't handle advanced responsibilities." The revelation sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. On the hegemony homeworld, emergency sessions were called to discuss the implications. On Centauri Prime, military leaders began calculating what human access to ancient technologies would mean for the balance of power. On hundreds of other worlds, beings who had lived their entire lives believing they understood galactic history suddenly realized how little they actually knew. "The trials will continue," David warned. "More human colonies will trigger test sequences in the coming years. Other species may also encounter trial systems as they develop. What happens next depends on whether we can work together to handle these revelations responsibly. Lisa Park's voice joined the broadcast from her embattled research station. The knowledge we carry includes locations of dormant trial sites throughout the galaxy. Some contain technologies that could revolutionize energy production, space travel, and medical science. Others contain weapon systems that could destroy entire star systems. Robert Nash added his voice from the mining platform. We've been hiding this information to protect the galaxy from premature access to dangerous technologies. But secrecy is no longer an option when multiple factions are hunting survivors to extract our knowledge by force. The broadcast continued for another hour as the three survivors shared information about the trial network that changed everything their listeners thought. They knew about galactic history and human potential. They revealed the true age of galactic civilization, the cyclical nature of technological advancement and destruction, and humanity's apparent role as potential inheritors of ancient responsibilities. When the broadcast ended, the galaxy had been irrevocably changed. The fighting around Port Meridian Station ceased as the various factions realized that the information they had been competing for was now public knowledge. The age of secrets was over. David Reed looked at Commander Ilth, who was staring at his communication screens in shock as reports poured in from across known space. Some worlds were panicking at the implications of human advancement. Others were beginning to reach out with offers of alliance or cooperation. A few were already mobilizing military forces in response to perceived threats. "What have we done?" Ilth asked quietly. David touched the scars on his chest, feeling the neural pathways that connected him to knowledge spanning millions of years of galactic history. "We've given our species the chance to choose their own future, instead of having it chosen for them by others." Outside Port Meridian Station, the ships that had come to capture or kill the trial survivors began departing for their home systems. The mission parameters had changed completely. Instead of controlling access to restricted information, the various factions now had to decide how to respond to a galaxy where humanity's true potential was no longer hidden. The ancient trial network remained scattered throughout space, waiting for the next species to trigger its evaluation protocols. But for the first time in 50,000 years, one race had gained access to the system's knowledge and chosen to share it openly rather than hoard it for their own advantage. David Reed, Lisa Park, and Robert Nash, the last three planet killer survivors, had made their choice. Now the rest of the galaxy would have to make theirs. The age of hidden trials and secret knowledge was ending. What came next would determine whether the galaxy was ready for the responsibilities that came with understanding its true history and the incredible technologies waiting to be discovered.